Yo guys, welcome back again for another video. Today we're going to be talking about a legendary African warrior, king, and the ruler of the Zulu Empire. Now today we're going to be talking about Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu was born around 1787 in Zululand, located on the eastern coast of modern-day South Africa. Shaka was son of Nandi and Senzangakana. Senzangakana was a chief of the Zulu tribe at the time. The Zulus were a small tribe at the time, and most surrounding tribes in the area come from the Nguni people. The word Zulu can be translated to the heavens above, the people of the heavens, and according to the Zulu, they came from a mystical land in Central Africa called Mbo. His mother Nandi was a chief's daughter from a nearby tribe. This caused a dilemma due to Senzangakana not being married to Nandi and being from a different clan. It is believed that soon after he would marry Nandi. This union would not last long, as relations between father and mother would be very rough, and clan leaders not agreeing to the birth of Shaka. Eventually Shaka and his mother would go into exile, and she took Shaka back to her tribe, the Erlangeni. Shaka was in question by Zulus if he was of royal blood, while Nandi's people would shun Shaka and Nandi, pushing their bond even closer. Shaka would spend earlier years herding cattle while also dueling other kids in Zulu stick fighting. Shaka was so good that most boys would not try to battle him. He would soon go to live with his aunt and the Ntetwa people. Nandi had ties with the Ntetwa people, and her and Shaka would be welcomed. Shaka would speak of his chiefdom blood of the Zulus, but most kids did not believe him and would make fun of him. He was also known to be bigger than most kids, and would continue to grow in size till he was a young man of tall masculine stature. Described as brown skin with full facial features and a frightening strong demeanor. Shaka would get enlisted in the Ntetwa army as a young adult, which at the time Zulus served. The Ntetwa army was run by Chief Dingiswayo, and Chief Dingiswayo built a federation of 50 tribes through diplomacy, politics, and warfare. Shaka would go on to learn many things from his new role in the Ntetwa army. He would learn warfare tactics, politics, and strategy for many years. He was very fascinated by military tactics and learned from Dingiswayo. Dingis would strategically deploy his men in battle, giving him an edge over his enemies. Shaka would go on to learn many lessons and start to implement and innovate strategies he thought were better. One innovation was Shaka felt throwing long traditional spears made from steel and wood was not smart and had disadvantages. He observed that once you throw the spear, your enemy could just pick it back up and throw it back at you if you missed. This would lead him to create a stabbing spear used to hold in close quarters combat, a heavier weapon with stronger wood and thicker blade. In combination with ramming enemies with shields while waiting for the perfect time to strike, this fighting style resulted in better outcomes. This combination with traditional shields would prove to be deadly to enemies. Shaka would move up in rank quickly and was not a long distance warrior, but rather enjoyed close quarters combat. He would spend much time thinking about conquest and forwarding his power. He would become one of Dingiswayo's favorite within the army. Dingiswayo would leave surviving men he fought to retreat and fight another day. But Shaka did not believe in such things. Shaka would believe in total defeat. In theory, Shaka did not want to leave any enemy able to fight another day. He would be so good in battle that Dingiswayo would go on to make him commander-in-chief. Not long after, in 1816, Shaka Zulu's father would die. The Zulu throne was now open, and Shaka wanted it. Dingiswayo would be killed by another powerful chief, Zoidi, and Shaka would take power of Dingiswayo's army. In Southeast Africa, in 1816, there was hundreds of tribes. Shaka would head back to the Zulus and go hunting with his brothers in the forest. One of his brothers was supposed to be the new chief of the tribe, but out on the hunt, Shaka would kill a lion fiercely, and his brother would hand over the title to Shaka due to being scared of him. Over the next 12 years, Shaka would go on a campaign to unite tribes within the region. He would use political tactics and gestures of friendship to gain other tribes' loyalty. If a tribe did not want to join under the Zulu nation, Shaka would take the chiefdom by force. Shaka had an absolute vision of one empire. He was very absolute in the power of his people. and people who did not respect his orders would be punished and in many occasions killed. He believed in a very strong military and disciplined soldiers, so much so he would make examples of soldiers who fled the battlefield or lost their spears. Discipline was key to Shaka. In one occasion, he would even kill 2 of his own men because they did not obey his order to stump thorny vines flat barefooted. He saw this as training to toughen his soldiers up, as well as train them to withstand pain. After the killing of the 2 men, the rest of the army started to stump the vines flat barefooted. 2 Europeans at the time that were out to colonize South Africa wrote many stories about Shaka. These 2 Europeans were Nathaniel Isaac and Henry Francis Finn. Nathaniel wrecked on the coast of South Africa and spent about 3 months with Shaka in the empire. He then went on to be a slave trader. Henry's history is unclear on why he was in the area. Shaka would welcome Henry in the empire, seeing no threat in one white man. Henry states that Shaka was ruthless in some of his acts, yet he was also revered as a savior of the Zulu people and somewhat of a divine being. Shaka's dream of power in uniting many tribes and regional nations cannot be denied. Some tribes were big and well respected, while others were small and not respected. Many details are not known about Shaka, but we do know that his conquest to unite many tribes under one nation was absolute. There is no clear picture on how Shaka really looked, but we do have a painting of him from European travelers who visited the empire. Dressing in Zulu traditional attire, which consists of animal skins, cowtail fringes, and clothing made from other animals within the region. He is also depicted as a tall, powerful man with a strong stature. Other chiefs in the region were also as mighty as Shaka, and one of them was Chief Zwide. Chief Zwide was a powerful chief such as Shaka and was not scared of anyone in the region. Shaka was not ready to face up to the powerful chief, so he moved the Zulu capital to Bulawayo. He would establish lookouts for raiders and was close to resources such as water. The nearby forest would also be a good area to retreat if needed. The water would also be a good area for the Zulu nation's cattle to drink from. Shaka knew he did not have long before Chief Zwide would send raiders from one of his many controlled tribes. Shaka would soon order many Zulu blacksmiths to create many weapons for the upcoming clash between chiefs. The main choice of weapon was thousands of produced short-staffed spears. Shaka did not underestimate the other chief's powerful nature, leaving Shaka to devise war tactics and plans to eliminate the threat. In 1818, his northern rival would attack Shaka. The Ndrundre army would outnumber Shaka's army. Zwide had an army of 12,000 troops, outnumbering Shaka's army 2-1. Shaka would go on to use war tactics like the Horn of the Bull. Though he did not create it, he did refine it to almost near perfect level. The Horn of the Bull consisted of 3 bodies of troops side by side. The chest of the bull, or the middle regiment of the soldiers, would advance. The other 2 sides, the horns, would lie in the tall grasses until Shaka would shout, "Rise up." The horns were made up of young, fast warriors who would use their speed to rush enemies and get into formation. The horns would then flank the enemy on the left and right side, enclosing them in a circle. While in the circle, the warriors would enclose on the enemies, picking them apart. The enemy would be back to back with nowhere to go. Shaka's soldiers on the outside of the circle would turn to scout the field and protect fellow soldiers within the circle. A highly intelligent tactic indeed. Shaka would also use other unique strategies like retreating from the enemy, leaving items to distract them like cattle and goods. This was Shaka's plan in war, to strike when the enemy was comfortable, especially at night when the enemy set camp, thinking they had the upper hand for the next day of battle. Shaka's troops would sneak in the middle of the night and kill off camps of advancing enemies. This would cause fear and panic, and Shaka was a master of psychology. Eventually, Zwide would be killed and his army would retreat to the north, and Shaka would send his army chasing after the enemy. Eventually, Sikanyani would take over Zwide's army soon after. Shaka would chase them to surrounding hills with a river in the middle. He would then position parts of his army to surprise flank the enemy. He would go on to break up the enemy's army and totally destroy the enemy. He would capture some of the enemy's men and make them submit to join his army. Shaka would send parts of his army into Zwide's nation and destroy all proof of their existence, homes and all. By 1821, Shaka expanded Zulu land and had over 9,000 miles of land. Even one time, Shaka and his troops came back from the battle with 1,000 cattle. Commanding a wide area would also lead to strife and disagreements within the empire. Shaka would keep chiefs in continuous military campaigns until he thought they earned the right of manhood. Then they could move from the army and marry a woman. Young men from different tribes within the Zulu nation would be taken to royal households while enrolled in the army. This was to produce a common identity amongst different peoples. While staying at the royal homes, the young men would be fed, shielded, and given weapons. The royal cattle made up of the best cows in the land would feed and be used to make the best shields for the new warriors. Women would be also picked from all over the empire and sent to the royal homes. The woman would take place in royal dance and wait for men to leave the army to marry them. Shaka would leave his aunts in charge of the young women, and the royal homes were ran by aunts, not kings' wives. Shaka did not want to produce a replacement and would punish any woman who was pregnant by him. Shaka would appoint chiefs to run the chiefdoms with the Zulu Empire, and the soldiers would return to the community in which they came from after their service. Many captains of the king received many cattle and power and would build up followings of their own in their territory. Shaka would spend his time not in battle coming up with ways to better fight wars and refining what worked and disregarded what didn't. Many enemies would use sandals in battle, but the Zulu trained on bare feet so they would not stumble over the sandals. Shaka was somewhat absolute of his vision. No one holding back nor obeying would be spared, woman, child, nor man. Believing in discipline and psychology, Shaka would make soldiers who did not perform well eat meat soaked in milk. This was usually fed to young Zulu children, and this was a sign of a warrior being childish. This would prone the warrior to do better next battle, so he would not have to be humiliated in front of the other soldiers. Dancing and music were a huge part of the Zulu nation. Shaka's courts were very important. He did not tolerate any citizen laughing when it was not time to, or coughing when he was speaking. Though Shaka was in full control, plots were developing within the nation, and outside powers would soon lead to Shaka's downfall. After 8 years of conquest in the area, many British explorers would show up on the coast of South Africa. Hearing of Shaka Zulu's wealth, the Europeans wanted to trade with Shaka for ivory and other goods. The Europeans' future plan was to colonize the area as well. Shaka was curious and wanted to learn more about the Europeans' culture, technology, welfare, and guns. He also knew that in the future, these foreigners would be the downfall of the Zulu Empire. One day, while 3 Europeans visited the Zulu nation, Shaka was almost killed by an assassin in a rival tribe. Henry Finn would be within the area and would help heal Shaka with lemon and tea after being stabbed by an acid spear. Some think that Europeans put the man up to stabbing Shaka as well. Shaka wanted to express his thanks, and Europeans asked Shaka to grant them land for the permanent settlement. Such cities as modern Durban in South Africa were granted, establishing the first British colonies in South Africa. Shaka still had no worries about forces from the outside, but he was very scared of inner spirits. The Zulus believed that ancestral spirits worked through Shaka, good and bad spirits. Anything Shaka had touched could be used by his enemies within spiritual warfare. This was a great fear and weapon that could be used against Shaka and the Zulu people. Shaka was looked after by spiritual medicine men, and even his food was looked after for spiritual foul play. His food was also watched after for signs of poison. In 1827, Shaka would be at the height of the Zulu Empire, but a tragedy would soon arise. Shaka's mother, Nandi, would die that day while he was out hunting. She would be buried with 10 maids who were buried alive with her to survive and look after her in the next life. With the death of his mother, Shaka would make the empire mourn for his mother. Many bad things would happen during this event: strife amongst people, killing, power shifts, and mourning. The Zulu traditions ordered 3 months of mourning. No milk could be drunk and no crops could be grown. Many would die and killings would happen throughout the empire. Shaka respected people who stood for what they believed in, and one day a man would go straight to Shaka and tell him that this had to stop. or he would have no people to rule. Shaka would respect what that man had to say and rewarded him with cattle for his courage. It is unclear through oral history and evidence how Shaka was killed. One oral story says a servant killed him for killing the servant's mother. Another states Shaka would soon fall to a coup, where his two half-brothers would kill Shaka in 1828 at the royal house. Shaka was left alone that day without royal guards due to the army sweeping the land for various things. One of his half-brothers, Dingani, would go on to rule after Shaka's death. Shaka's last words to his brothers would be they would not rule when he was dead, and the white settlers would win over the land after he was gone. Within 10 years, the British and Dutch armies were settling and colonizing the region. After 50 years of Shaka's death, the Zulus under Dingani would face one of the greatest battles in history. In 1879, the Zulus would fight the British with the same short spears and shields that Shaka had created, going on to beat the British in a battle that the British should have won with artillery, guns, and rockets that the British had available. 1,700 British troops would be reduced to 400 retreating men. Shaka's war tactics were used, and this would mark one of the most legendary war battles in history. The British would be outclassed, outgeneraled, and stunned by the tactical ability of the Zulus. Though 6 months later, the British would win the war with long-range weapons versus the Zulus' close combat weapons. Yo guys, so today we learned about the legendary warrior Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu is known throughout the whole world, in every nation, in every society. Most people know who Shaka Zulu is, and if you don't, well, you learned about Shaka Zulu today. And yo guys, until next time, please like me on all social medias, which is Afric Network, which is Snapchat, Instagram, SoundCloud, Twitter, and Facebook. Each one teach one. Please turn on the bell notification down at the bottom so you'll always receive my videos. Like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, peace, one love.